The air in Washington was heavy that night. The streets were empty, the lamps humming low, the city asleep above a secret it never wanted to wake. Beneath the east wing of the White House, a work crew in 1901 struck something solid. Not stone, not earth. Bone. The foreman froze. 12 skulls, tangled in soil like a confession whispered too late. The superintendent ordered silence. The men reburied what they'd found before dawn. No report, no names. Just a hole sealed twice. Once by earth, once by fear. A century earlier, hundreds of enslaved men had built this house of marble and myth. Their sweat soaked its foundations. Their names vanished from every ledger. But some refused erasure. They carved their initials into the stones, T.H., P.L., Isaac, invisible under plaster, waiting for history to remember. The White House was built on chains, and the ghosts beneath it still wait for someone to speak. Tonight, we will. If this story already tightens something in your chest, stay with me. This is the hidden history beneath the nation's proudest symbol, the truth that power tried to bury. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear for more stories that strip the paint off America's monuments and expose the bones beneath, because remembering them isn't politics, it's justice. The fog rolled in from the Potomac before dawn. The men rose in silence, breath turning white, eyes hollow from another sleepless night. The swamp stank of rot, of sweat, of something older than either. Shovels struck mud like muffled drums. Every blow echoed through the valley where no one was meant to hear. Orders barked from the ridge. A voice said, "Faster, boys!" No names, just numbers and noise. Isaac worked the hardest. His hands were carpenter's hands, steady, scarred, unyielding. He measured every cut like prayer, every plank like proof that his existence wasn't ash. He never spoke unless it mattered. Across from him, a younger man named Tom hauled stone until his shoulders bled. Tom still believed strength could outlast injustice. He looked to Isaac for guidance, but Isaac had already seen hope break under history's weight. The overseer, a man called Harlow, watched with a pistol at his hip. He didn't need to use it. The sound of it clinking against his belt was sermon enough. Every man knew the gospel of pain. By noon, the sun burned through mist and mercy alike. The foundation pit shimmered. Steam rose from backs bent in endless rhythm. Nobody spoke, because words meant weakness, and weakness meant replacement. Peter Lennox, the quarryman, oversaw stone delivery from Virginia. He'd been enslaved twice, once by the law, once by memory. He believed if he could shape stone perfectly, maybe time would remember his name. He carved PL into the underside of one block before sending it upriver. A mark small as defiance, deep as faith. He smiled once, brief, invisible, then turned back to work as though he hadn't done it. That night, the barracks creaked in the wind. The men ate saltfish and cold cornmeal. Laughter was rare and dangerous. It drew attention. But one man whispered, "We building a cage for the free." Isaac looked up. "No," he said softly. "We're building proof we were here." The words hung in the smoky air like sparks that refused to die. Around them, firelight made ghosts of the living. Days became months. The swamp turned to mud, then stone, then myth. Each wall rose from the bones of exhaustion. Each breath cost more than the last. The commissioners called it progress. The men called it surviving. When the frost came, the air sliced skin like glass. Fingers cracked, blood froze, but still they dug. The government had no money, but it had bodies, hundreds of them, rented like tools. Tom counted days in his head, carving notches into a plank beside his cot. When Harlow found them, he beat him and threw the plank into the fire. Tom didn't scream. He watched the marks burn. At night, the older men told stories to stay human, stories of rivers back home, of sons they'd never see again. Isaac never joined in. He just stared at his hands as though they were strangers. The project grew larger than any of them could imagine. The building's white stone shone even before paint. They said it would be a palace for liberty. The irony was so loud it didn't need words. Peter brought new stones from Aquia every week. He carved quietly on each load, initials, dates, a secret roll call of the damned. If discovered, he'd be whipped or worse. But he kept carving anyway. Harlow noticed Isaac's silence more than anything. "You think you're better than them?" he sneered one morning. Isaac didn't reply. The overseer raised his whip, but stopped short. Something in Isaac's eyes told him not to. There was a moment after every storm when the sight went still. Water dripping from beams, the smell of rain and sweat mixing into something metallic. Those were the only moments Isaac felt alive. Len, the oldest among them, carried stone long past his strength. His beard was gray, his knees gone, but he worked like penance, muttering the same line each morning. "If I stop, they win." By 1793, the first walls rose above the pit. The men looked up at what they'd made and felt nothing. Pride was a luxury denied to the enslaved. Progress belonged to someone else's history. One evening, a scaffold collapsed. 2 men died before sundown. The third lived just long enough to whisper, "Tell them I was here." The overseers buried him near the kiln. No marker, no name. The next morning, Isaac found a splinter of wood beside the grave. He carved a single line with his chisel. "Remember." Then he buried it under the dirt before Harlow could see. Tom saw him do it. That night he said, "They'll cover everything we make." Isaac answered, "Then we build deeper." He didn't mean the house. He meant the truth that refuses to stay buried. As the foundation took shape, new men arrived, strangers from plantations upriver. They carried stories of sickness and punishment, but they carried something else too, rumor of rebellion in the South. At night, they whispered plans under their breath: escape, uprising, vengeance. Isaac listened but never spoke. He knew the swamp better than any man there. He also knew ghosts don't outrun their graves. Winter of 1794 brought disease. The men coughed blood into straw beds. The overseers replaced them as fast as they fell. Ledgers changed names like the weather. Records forgot what memory refused to. One dawn, Peter didn't show for work. His tools lay where he'd left them. No one asked why. They'd learned the price of curiosity. The sound of hammers drowned the silence he left behind. Isaac worked harder after that, as if motion could keep grief at bay. He carved another mark in a hidden beam. 3 letters this time, I-S-A. He ran his hand over it once, then walked away. By 1795, they'd built something that would outlive them all. The commissioners called it the President's House. The men called it the Tomb. Every block was a coffin, every nail a prayer unspoken. The night before winter ended, Tom dreamed of light breaking through stone, a sun no one could own. He woke to the sound of rain and Isaac's voice whispering, "We'll make them remember." When morning came, the rain had turned the soil to glass. The men marched out again, shovels in hand. Above them, scaffolds swayed like gallows in the wind. The house stood watching, white and waiting. Isaac took his place beside the wall and lifted his hammer. His hands shook once, then steadied. He whispered the names of every man who'd vanished. Each strike became a heartbeat, echoing through centuries. He didn't know his marks would survive. He didn't know one day men would find them, turned inward, hidden from sight. All he knew was this: he had carved his proof into history's bones. The sun rose behind the unfinished mansion, bleeding light across wet stone. Isaac set down his hammer. For a moment, he thought he heard voices, not of the living, but of those the world forgot. And somewhere beneath the ground, the earth answered back. The heat came early that year. By July, the air over the capital shimmered like glass. Men moved slower, breaths ragged, their shirts clinging wet against skin already cracked from sun and salt. The swamp reeked of rot and fever. Mosquitoes thick as smoke swarmed every face, every wound. The overseers barked orders, their voices melting into the hum of heat. Nobody argued. Everyone knew the cost of defiance. Isaac kept his head down, sweat dripping into his eyes. He had survived too many seasons to believe the heat would spare him now. Still, he worked, hammer rising, falling, rhythm against despair. Tom stumbled that afternoon. His shovel clanged against stone. Harlow struck him across the back without hesitation. The crack echoed through the pit, sharp as a pistol. Tom didn't cry out. He just kept digging. By dusk, half the men were coughing. The air felt heavy, thick with something invisible and cruel. A man named Ben vomited blood by the kiln, then collapsed. They carried him to the barracks and left him there. That night, no one slept. The heat didn't break. It grew heavier, pressing against lungs like punishment. Men whispered that the swamp had turned cursed, that the ground itself was swallowing them alive. When dawn came, Ben was dead. They buried him behind the tool shed before the overseers woke. No prayer, no cross, just dirt over flesh. Isaac carved a notch into his hammer's handle. One mark, one name. By noon, 5 more men had fallen sick. The commissioner's clerk wrote only labor shortage due to illness. The words stripped flesh from truth. They didn't mean sick, they meant dying. They didn't mean shortage, they meant forgotten. Colin Williamson, the Scottish mason, wrote in his journal that week. He said the Negro men worked despite bleeding hands, despite the fever. He said the doctor came only for the white stonemasons. That was enough truth for history. Inside the quarters, men coughed red into rags. The air smelled of sweat and rust. Isaac poured water over Tom's head and whispered, "Breathe, brother." Tom's breath rattled, but his eyes still held fire. "I ain't done yet." By the 4th day, the sickness spread like rumor. The overseers ordered the sick moved to a shed near the kiln. No medicine, no care, just isolation disguised as mercy. They called it containment. The men called it the last stop. Isaac followed them once. He stood outside the shed and heard the sounds. Coughing, moaning, a man begging for water. Another voice whispered a prayer, half delirium, half farewell. Isaac turned away before he broke. That night, rain came like judgment. The shed's roof leaked, soaking fevered men. One of them, Len, the old laborer, called out for Isaac, his voice trembling, "Brother, they leaving us." Isaac pressed his forehead to the mud. He couldn't answer. The next morning, Harlow found Isaac staring toward the kiln. "You think they matter?" he said, spitting into the dirt. Isaac didn't look at him. "They matter more than you ever will." Harlow's whip answered, cutting through air and flesh alike. Isaac didn't scream. He just rose again, blood trailing down his back, and went back to work. The men saw it. They didn't cheer. They just straightened their spines. Some defiance needs no noise. By the 7th day, the shed was quiet. Too quiet. Colin wrote in his diary that the overseers claimed recovery. But no wagons came, no men returned. The shed stood empty, reeking of death and ash. That night, Isaac snuck out. He dug by lantern light, his hands raw, searching the ground near the kiln. He found torn cloth, a rusted chain, a human tooth glinting under moonlight. He stopped digging when dawn touched the horizon. He washed in silence that morning. The others didn't ask. They already knew. Silence was the only grave they could afford. Every man carried ghosts now, heavy as the stones they lifted. By mid-July, replacements arrived. New bodies, new silence. The overseers spoke of progress. Isaac watched the new men's eyes, bright with confusion, not yet dulled by understanding. He envied their ignorance, hated their hope. Tom's fever worsened. He lay near the window, sweat soaking his straw bed. "We're dying for a house we'll never enter," he whispered. Isaac gripped his hand. "Maybe not, but it'll remember us." When Tom died, the world didn't pause. The overseers shouted orders. The hammers kept striking. But that night, Isaac gathered the men. They buried Tom near the shed. He carved his friend's name in a stone fragment, T. The next morning, Harlow noticed the missing workers. "Where's the boy?" he asked. Isaac stared straight ahead. "Gone," he said. "Like the rest." Harlow smirked. "Plenty more where he came from." Isaac whispered, "Not like him." The heat broke in August. The fever didn't. Every man left standing worked double hours to meet the commissioner's deadline. No one spoke of the dead. But the silence between hammer strikes was thick with memory. Colin Williamson wrote his final entry that summer. He described the shed, the graves, the fear. He said no one would ever read his words. He was wrong. History finds what guilt tries to hide. By September, the government stopped paying plantation owners for lost workers. The letters became colder. Words like unfortunate circumstances replaced death. Ledger lines erased humanity one ink stroke at a time. Isaac stopped carving initials in the walls. Instead, he began whispering names into wet mortar as he worked. Each syllable dried into stone, invisible scripture, the only prayers he could still believe in. When the season ended, the overseers burned the shed to the ground. They said it was for sanitation. The men knew better. The fire cracked like bones breaking, sparks rising like souls. The wind carried the smoke toward the city. Isaac stood at the edge of the field watching the flames. "They think burning it erases it," he murmured. The man beside him, the new mason, Jonah, asked, "Then what keeps it alive?" Isaac said, "Us." The swamp cooled when autumn came, but the ground stayed restless. Beneath it, bones shifted. The earth itself seemed to remember. Every time a man struck the foundation, it answered back with the hollow echo of the buried. The house rose higher that year. White stone gleamed against the blue sky. From a distance, it looked like triumph. Up close, it smelled of sweat, blood, and silence. The men who built it knew the difference. Isaac placed the final stone before winter. He pressed his hand against it and whispered the same word carved into his hammer. "Remember." Then he turned away, leaving behind more than the wall could hold. No ceremony marked that day. No names were read. But beneath the surface of the new nation's grandest house, the dead still waited, patient, buried deep, their story not yet done. The turn of the century brought silence over the capital. The house stood tall, perfect, shining like a lie, polished for public display. The men who built it had long returned to dust. In 1901, the earth broke its vow of silence. A worker's shovel struck something that wasn't stone. The sound was hollow, soft. When they dug deeper, they found the first skull, then another, then more. Henry Reed, the superintendent, arrived within the hour. The men stood back, sweat mixing with fear. The bones stared up from the soil like memory refusing burial. Reed felt the weight of a century pressing down. He counted 12 skulls before the light failed. The air stank of iron and time. One of the older workers, Joseph, whispered, "They're the ones who built it." No one contradicted him. Some truths don't need proof. Reed dismissed the crew by dusk. He ordered the hole filled before dawn. The bones were reburied under the same dirt that had betrayed them. No report was filed. No priest called. Only silence and shovels. That night, Reed sat in his boarding room, staring at his hands. He was 53, a man of order, not ghosts. But the faces he'd seen underground stayed with him, staring through the years. Joseph knocked quietly before curfew. "Sir," he said, voice trembling, "my father told stories about this place. Said his grandfather worked here. Said men died and were buried right by the wall. They called them the Forgotten Ones." Reed listened, uneasy. "Did your father say how many?" Joseph shook his head. "Just that the ground never rests easy. Some nights you can hear them digging still." Reed dismissed him, but the words followed into his dreams. He wrote in his diary that night. 12 skulls, perhaps more. Found beneath the East Wing foundation. No coffins, no markings. Damage to bone suggests trauma. Reburied before dawn. The silence feels heavier than sin. The next morning, Reed gathered the crew. "You saw nothing," he said. "You speak of this, you're finished." The men nodded. Fear has its own language. It doesn't need repetition to be obeyed. Work moved to the west side of the house. The sun rose without remorse. Reed felt the building's shadow stretch longer each day, as if the house itself wanted to hide its foundation. Joseph avoided the site where they'd dug. When asked, he said nothing, but each night he left a single stone on the ground above the burial spot, small offerings to those who had no graves. Weeks later, during renovation inside, another secret surfaced. Behind cracked plaster, a worker found marks carved into stone. Initials, faint but deliberate. T.H., P.L., Isaac. The letters caught sunlight like whispers finally freed. The foreman ordered the wall sealed again. "Not our concern," he said. But a young worker named O'Brien sketched the carvings in his notebook that night. He didn't understand why. Only that forgetting felt wrong. Reed read O'Brien's note days later. He closed his eyes and saw the same initials carved into the faces of the skulls. The connection was silent but certain. The men buried below had signed their work. At dusk, Reed walked the east lawn alone. The grass was damp, the air still. He thought of Joseph's story, of men building a monument that became their tomb. He whispered, "They built this house twice, once in life, once in death." Each night he heard noises beneath the floorboards, settling timber, shifting pipes, or something older. He began to write less in his diary and drink more from the bottle hidden behind his wardrobe. Joseph noticed Reed's eyes growing hollow. "You see them too, don't you?" he asked one night. Reed didn't answer. Silence was confession enough. They both knew ghosts travel through guilt faster than through walls. In November, heavy rain flooded the excavation trench. Workers said the ground bled. Reed dismissed them, but the water ran brown for days. He knew it wasn't rust. The soil was remembering again. O'Brien stopped coming to work. He left Washington without notice. In his rented room, someone later found the notebook with sketches of carved names and one line beneath them. "They'll never let the dead rest." Reed kept that notebook. He couldn't throw it away, couldn't read it again either. It sat on his desk like judgment, its pages smelling faintly of plaster and regret. The silence around it grew unbearable. By December, the renovations were nearly done. The president's staff planned tours and ceremonies. The marble floors gleamed. Beneath them, 12 men lay unmourned, their proof sealed under perfect symmetry. Reed visited the burial site one last time. Joseph was already there, standing still. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The ground between them spoke in the language of unfinished work. "I'll mark it somehow," Reed said. Joseph nodded. "Not with words," he answered. "They'd only erase them again." He dropped another stone into the dirt. The sound was soft, final, like a heartbeat fading. That night, Reed opened his diary again. "We've hidden them twice, once beneath stone, once beneath fear. The cost of silence feels heavier than the house itself." He closed the book and locked it away. Spring arrived with false light. The house gleamed, new and holy, a monument to denial. Visitors walked through its halls without knowing the bones below their feet. The nation's pride rested on unmarked graves. Reed watched them from a distance. His hair had gone white. Joseph had left for good, refusing payment. Some debts can't be measured in wages. Some labor never ends, even when the tools are dropped. When the last scaffold came down, Reed touched the east wall. Beneath the plaster, the names still waited. Men whose lives were written out of history but carved into the building itself. He whispered, "I remember." He died 23 years later, the secret still buried with him. His diary, discovered by his grandson, told everything. 12 skulls, silent orders, a century's guilt, the truth resting beneath the nation's heartbeat. The White House glowed in the morning sun, serene, immaculate. Tourists took photographs. Guides spoke of presidents and progress. No one mentioned the men beneath their feet. Silence had become tradition, but the house still breathed. On certain nights, wind slipped through its foundation carrying faint sounds. Not voices, not words, just rhythm. Hammer strikes, steady, deliberate, echoing through stone. The builders still at work. The forgotten ones had never left. They had only gone deeper. And every time the lights of the Capitol flickered, every time thunder rolled over the Potomac, the earth whispered the same word through time. Remember. The renovations were finished by spring. The White House gleamed, new paint over old secrets. Men walked its corridors proud of their craft, unaware they stood upon the work of the dead. In the basement, dust drifted through shafts of light. A young janitor named Samuel found loose plaster behind a storage wall. When he pried it open, he saw markings carved into the stone. Faint, deliberate, human. T.H.P.L. Isaac. The letters glimmered beneath years of dust. Samuel traced them with his thumb, feeling the grooves like pulse lines. The air grew still, as if listening. He told no one. Men like him weren't supposed to speak of what they found. But that night, as he mopped the East Hall, he whispered the names beneath his breath, tasting the weight of them. Upstairs, the president entertained guests. Laughter echoed across marble floors. Music filled the halls. Below, Samuel replaced the plaster carefully, sealing the letters again, like a priest performing an unrecorded rite. He dreamed of hammers that night, not the clang of labor, but rhythm, deliberate, echoing through stone. He woke to silence and a sense that the walls were still working. Weeks passed. The city forgot the renovations. The newspapers praised the house's beauty, its perfection. None mentioned bones. None mentioned initials carved by hands that bled in anonymity. Samuel began collecting stories. From groundskeepers, from old masons, from Joseph, now gray, still silent. Each man had heard rumors of the buried. None knew the truth, only fragments. Fragments were enough. He met Joseph behind the tool shed one dusk. The old man said, "I was there when they found the skulls. Reed buried them again. Said it was better that way. Maybe for him." Samuel asked what he should do. Joseph looked at the glowing windows above them. "Write it down," he said. "They can't bury paper as deep as bone." Then he walked away, vanishing into the dark. That night, Samuel wrote everything. The carvings, the whispers, Joseph's words. He hid the pages behind a loose board beneath the stairs. He signed it only with his initials, a silent pact with the past. Winter crept in again. The house creaked under frost. Each sound carried memory. Samuel heard footsteps where no one walked, the low hum of men breathing who no longer had lungs. Sometimes he swore he could smell earth, damp, old, heavy with secrets. He'd pause his work, stare at the floor, and whisper, "I see you." Then keep mopping, careful, reverent, afraid. In the spring of 1902, another repair exposed the same carved stones. Different workers this time, different silence. The supervisor saw the letters, muttered nonsense, and ordered them covered. History obeyed again. But one worker, a mason named Brooks, took a piece of plaster with him. A small fragment, initials barely visible. He kept it in his pocket for years, a relic of someone else's truth. Brooks died in 1920. His son found the fragment among his belongings. He didn't understand what it meant, but couldn't throw it away. The stone survived, moving from one pocket to another across generations. By 1978, the story began surfacing again. Historians found diaries, letters, fragments. They pieced together what the ground already knew. The house stood on graves. The truth stirred, restless but undeniable. In an archive basement, a researcher uncovered Reed's diary. 12 skulls, silent orders, fear, guilt. The handwriting trembled, but the confession was clear. The dead had waited 77 years for a witness. Another historian found O'Brien's sketchbook. The carvings matched the initials on Reed's notes. The puzzle completed itself, every line whispering the same plea. We were here. But the official report said only unverified accounts. Bureaucracy disguised cowardice again. The bones stayed buried. The story stayed unofficial. The house remained white, but its shadow darkened with each uncovered word. In 1982, a man named Marcus, a caretaker, discovered Samuel's hidden pages behind the stairs. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the story breathed. He read it aloud, alone, voice breaking. He carried the pages to the garden and buried them near the east wall. "Rest easy now," he murmured. "Somebody remembers." The wind moved through the trees like applause. Decades later, construction crews installing new cables unearthed fragments of bone again. The work halted briefly. A short report was filed. Then the dirt closed, same as before. The machine of forgetting resumed, but the walls still held their names. Each renovation, each layer of paint, sealed them tighter, preserving the defiance carved centuries before. The building itself had become their monument, unwilling but eternal. At night, when the corridors emptied, janitors still heard faint knocking beneath the floors. Some said it was plumbing, others refused to explain. Either way, no one stayed alone in the East Wing after midnight. Visitors sometimes claimed they heard humming, low, rhythmic, like the sound of men swinging hammers in the distance. Guides laughed it off. But sound has memory. Stone has conscience. Both remember what hands forget. Every generation of workers left their mark. Initials on beams, scratches behind panels, tributes to ghosts whose work had been stolen, the living and the dead, sharing the same silence. Today, tourists walk those halls in awe. They marvel at the chandeliers, the paintings, the speeches made there. They never look down. Beneath their feet, beneath their pride, the builders still sleep. And when storms roll over the Capitol, thunder echoes through the foundation like hammer blows, answering across time. The house trembles, not from wind, but from memory refusing erasure. The names remain in the walls, carved, buried, preserved. Tom, Isaac, Peter, Len. Their voices are stone now, their proof unbreakable. Every nail, every beam carries the echo of their truth. History can deny, rewrite, polish, but it cannot silence the foundation. The house stands because they built it. It endures because they refused to vanish. Their chains became its pillars. In the silence between lightning strikes, if you listen close enough, you'll hear them still. The rhythm of their labor, the breath of their defiance whispering through the stone. We were here. We built this. Remember us.